I hear dark, thinking all the dark things about communism. No, I'm not. It's going to be a bit of a really emphasis on the YOLO in this YOLO chat. All the other stuff that doesn't quite fit into your typical narrative of the Russian Revolution, the Civil War sausage, the famine, the Civil War, the terror, the executions, the war communism, all the things. What about all the other stuff? Because there's many elements to the revolutionary experience and things that are really uh, hard to encapsulate, but are so worthy of trying to understand the nature of what it felt like and to experience it, and particularly um, aspects that were associated with literacy, with art, and innovation are really important to help balance out all the Civil War sausage stuff. All right, so the revolution, at some experience, wasn't one of death and destruction and executions. It was also a striving for modernity to improve things. Socialism was meant to, shift humankind forward and also to offer a cultural revolution. One of the really important figures in this regard is the Commissar for Enlightenment, Anatoly Lunacharsky. And even his job, he's essentially the Minister for Arts and Education, but the way in which that's framed within Sovnarkom, that it's the Commissariat for Enlightenment to, really to enrich people, tells us something about what the Bolsheviks were trying to achieve. All right, and many people who were involved with artistic spheres saw the revolution as the dawning of a new age, an opportunity to try new and exciting things. And artists responded with new and exciting ways of expressing their artistic talent. So there was constructivist art, productivist art, okay, stuff that's super duper modern. Let's look at some pictures. Okay, so tech as here, aren't we? Alrighty. Check out this. This. Tatlin's Monument to the Third International. What an incredible. This didn't even get properly made. It was in, what would you call this? Planning. But it was to be this building that was to have glass rotating spheres that could project images out, onto the clouds at night time, to be somewhat like the Eiffel Tower, but as big as the Empire State Building. What an incredible expression of modernity. This is like something out of a science fiction film. Um, the themes that artists responded to, stuff like coal and factories, the Civil War, industry, for us a little bit, but for them, these were exciting. These were the themes that captured the nature of the revolution. There's a group of musicians who express their socialist convictions by sitting all in a circle together and indicating the changes in the music by eye contact and gesture rather than having a conductor. Getting all a bit random here, aren't we? But revolutionary poetry. You get this wonderful poem by Vladimir Mayakovsky called "The Left March." Rally the ranks into the march. Now's no time to quibble or browse there. Silence, you orators. You have the floor, Comrade Mauser. Enough of living by laws that Adam and Eve have left. Hustle, old history's horse. Left, 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 which is both a reference to marching but also telling you where your politics need to lie, according to Mayakovsky. All right, so and Mayakovsky himself, will find some stuff that he did. Was someone who really readily embraced the revolution and its elements that were trying to capture the excitement there. Look at me randomly flicking through my book here, trying to find what I wanted to show you. He was famous for what's called the roster window. There they are, beautiful. Roster window posters. They were to be displayed in the telegraph agency, and they were really accessible, really clear. They would, like cartoon style, but were referencing the policies and values of the day. This is the image I really, really wanted to look at. So this is a depiction of the Russian Civil War. Not that one, that one. This one, point at the right thing. Whee! Mad editing skills going on here. Okay, so you got beat the whites with the red wedge. What an incredible, depiction of the Civil War, which encapsulates sort of the new designs, the modernist aesthetic, but also telling the tale of the Civil War as well. The how by superior tactics the Red Army will prevail. Let's have a little random flip through what other things we've got here. Oh, here's another one of my favourite pictures. Like celebrating International Women's Day, but look at these sharp edges and the celebrating of a strong proletarian woman as the forefront, the key protagonist. The right word, of the drama. Agitprop trains. Google these so you have a better squeeze, but these brightly coloured, incredibly illustrated trains travelled from place to place with professional agitators who would, there'd be a band, movies, speeches, newspapers, all imparting, and lots of posters as well, all imparting the communist message. And these were very much too drawing on the importance of visuals in a society where literacy levels are low. Well, that was exciting, wasn't it? Well, what other things? My book. What other things changed? So, everyday life, the way it came to reflect the values of the new society. Names, which are really of places. Trotsk, Sverdlov, Stalingrad, Leningrad, Zinoviesk. Children's names, became things like Marx, Engelina. Terrora, Ilyich, Elena, Ninal's my favourite. That's Lenin spelled backwards. There was discussions about changing the nature of even speech to make it more efficient. You'll notice how the many Soviet institutions have an acronym for them. Cheka, Gosplan, etc. This was a way to shorten it and make more efficient language. Cultural, what would you call these? Everyday practices like marriages and baptisms, which were part of the flavour of everyday life, were changed to Octoberings. People had red marriages instead. So all these little things, came to reflect changes and the values, the changes that the revolution brought about, and the values it was meant to impart. Lunacharsky, one of his great passions was literacy, and there are many propaganda posters reference this, and challenging illiteracy was a major focus of the new society. Initially, the Red Army were given great deal of attention in this regard. So Red Army soldiers had literacy classes, they would march into battle, when cavalry would go into battle with letters on their back so they could learn, as they were marching. And there were classes available for workers, to learn at night time. And the literacy activists were sent to the countryside to teach peasants. Reading rooms were made available. Libraries were made available. You get these wonderful perspectives of the time, people talking about their experiences, where, they could talk about, how hungry they were, how much this, the Civil War, the famine bread sucked, the lice. But no, they're talking about what it was like to experience new worlds through reading. I'll read a couple of these that help to explain this. So during a visit to the Tambov region, a Red Army recruit, was showing off his knowledge. He visited it to an audience of peasants, and you can get a sense of what he'd been reading. Comrades, can you tell in diameters what you know of the internal size of our victorious Red Army? I am sure that diametrically perpendicular you cannot say anything about its internal size. Our victorious Red Army on a scale always beats our enemies in parallel. To understand the axiom, you ought not to think in straight lines like women, but perpendicularly by men. Then the two radiuses will be equal to a diameter. It makes no sense whatsoever, but he's been reading about maths, he's been reading about science, he's got new fancy pants words. You cannot take away from him, though, that excitement of opening up new worlds. And the Russian Revolution brought that. Another peasant wrote to officials, send me a list of books published on comets, stars, water, the earth, and sky. And what a wonderful thought to think, the way peasants now are, their attention was beyond icons and cockroaches, as Trotsky would have said, to very, deep and powerful things about the universe. Education was reformed, would look more like the education experiences that young people today would be familiar with. So project-based learning, not so much being lectured at by the teacher, but being involved with what they're learning. The area of study was to be contemporary, like what's happening in industry, what's happening in politics. Learning by doing was what Lunacharsky encouraged teachers to adopt. Another little story that resonates with me is the story of Dora Alkina, who is a literacy activist working among soldiers, and she is teaching them how to read, and she wrote and to write, and she wrote on the board, Masha ate the kasha, which is like the equivalent of Mary ate the porridge, and the soldiers are like, what, they heckle her, who's Masha? Is she hot? Whoop whoop, and she cracks it. Do you realize how this important is? And that you can't go back to your Mashas. You can't. There's not enough kasha because of the civil war. So what you're doing is important, and the revolution is important. And she writes on the board, then, we are not slaves. Slaves we are not. And the soldiers are, that's a powerful set of words. I want to learn how to write those. And those words, and the lesson then continues, and the soldiers pay attention now to Dora. And those words were for millions of Russians the first that ever learnt to read and write, became part of the curriculum in what's called readers, those books that you first learn to read off and learn to write with. So, art, culture, modernity were really important facets of the revolution as well. And a very important statistic was that 51% of Russians could read and write by the mid-1920s, as opposed to 23% at the turn of the century. So the revolution brought progress in that regard. Was it perfect? Hell no. But, one of the key themes, though, of the Russian Revolution was a striving to make things better through education, through literacy, through culture, to, as Lunacharsky's commissariat was, to provide enlightenment. Dictatorship wasn't the sum experience of the revolution. Was it, Darth?
The force is strong with this one. You don't know the power of the dark side. The force is strong with this one.
That's what I wanted. Thank you very much. Yolo, до свидания.